We are only weeks away from the 2023 football season to kick off, and you are still looking for that one extra piece that can set your team apart and make you a contender or get you into that championship, whatever the case may be. I'm bringing you some dynasty players that you should be trading for in a win now scenario. Players I really believe that can take you and bring you to that next step coming into the 2023 season. Comment down below of any players that you believe could be win now players and have really good value at the moment. And as always, go to flogfantasy.com/land, the best place to support what Zach and I are doing here. Rankings, articles, and bonus content, and so much more. Not only do you get that, you get our fantasy hotline, a private message or chat with Zach and myself, and so much more, so many other content from the other content creators as well. So once again, flogfantasy.com/land, 30% off at sign up, and let's get straight to the video. Okay, so I'm going to be starting off at the wide receiver position. Someone that I have been talking about a lot lately in redraft and dynasty. I feel like he is my new Elijah Moore, my older Elijah Moore, if you will, coming into this year, and that is Diontae Johnson, wide receiver 37 in the community. He is my wide receiver 32. And once again, if you're in a win now perspective, if you're somebody that needs that extra wide receiver, maybe you have 3 wide receivers, maybe you have 3 flex. As you guys know, we like to start wide receivers at the flex position over the running back, tight ends, or whatever position you can put on there. For us, it's the wide receiver position that gains a little bit more value here. But Diontae Johnson, I think the perspective is skewed coming into this year. I think there's a lot of undervaluing with Diontae Johnson, but I do believe the community, especially in redraft, is starting to pick up. So maybe that could easily translate in dynasty, in the win now teams in the dynasty world, I guess you can say. But let me remind you, this past year, 147 targets, 0 touchdowns. Finished wide receiver 28, and I think that is the biggest caveat here, where a lot of people really say, well, he was really high coming into this year. We saw a lot of opportunity for Diontae Johnson. He was getting drafted 4th round, I would say late 4th round, early 5th round. He was projected as a top 20, top 22 wide receiver, and that just wasn't the case this year anymore, or that this past year, obviously, when he finishes with 0 touchdowns. But one of the things that we need to remember is that Diontae Johnson is going to be getting the targets. 147 targets this past year, 2nd highest in his career. He top 10 in targets when you look at the wide receiver position this past year as well. I mean, you look at wide receivers that he had more targets than: Amon-Ra St. Brown, AJ Brown, Michael Pittman, Devonta Smith, Jamar Chase, Amari Cooper, Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle. I mean, the list goes on and on. It is kind of phenomenal how much that they really put Diontae Johnson into this game plan. Not only that, I am a massive believer that this Pittsburgh Steelers is going to take a massive leap in real football, and in my opinion in the fantasy world as well, when it comes down to relevancy and consistency for them competing in a week-to-week basis. Kenny Pickett taking the next step, this offensive line getting better, giving Kenny Pickett more time, Diontae Johnson, George Pickens, Pat the Dragon. I think all these guys can eat this year, but the guy who is the wide receiver 1 on this team, in my opinion, at least for this year coming into the 2023 season, that can easily lead this team in targets, is Diontae Johnson. I love George Pickens. I do believe George Pickens could have a good breakout year, but hey, if I'm really projecting this right, George Pickens and Diontae Johnson can easily be at least top 25, 28 type of wide receivers coming into the 2023 season. But once again, Diontae Johnson being the wide receiver 28 this past year, coming in as a wide receiver 37, my wide receiver 32, and you just need that extra piece. You need another wide receiver. Maybe you had a Rashad Bateman and you don't really trust him. Maybe you had a Kadarius Toney. Maybe you had Jameson Williams that's suspended for the first 6 weeks. Whatever the case may be, and you can get another wide receiver like a Diontae Johnson right now that hopefully you don't have to pay too much for. I think that is a phenomenal value. So what would I be paying to acquire someone like a Diontae Johnson? What happens if you send away Chris Godwin? I bought Chris Godwin in multiple videos saying he's a good value right now, but I don't love that quarterback position. I think he's a good buy low if you're a futuristic team, maybe a year out to competing. But right now, I'd rather have Diontae Johnson. What about someone like a Rachaad White? Maybe you don't need a Rachaad White. Maybe you give Rachaad White and you throw in a little piece. right? What about an Aaron Jones? You throw Aaron Jones in a piece, okay? What about someone like a Hollywood Brown? I think you are going to be able to send Hollywood Brown, or excuse me, you can be able to receive Deontay Johnson and more if you were to send away Hollywood Brown, obviously with Kyler Murray not starting this year, at least in the first half of the season coming into this year. So many different ways that you can go about it, but Deontay Johnson, a phenomenal win now piece if you are one piece away from competing. My next win now target at the tight end position, honestly, I'm bringing him in redraft. I'm bringing him in Dynasty. Once again, win now categories. That is Darren Waller, tight end 10, excuse me, in the community. He is also my tight end 10, but somebody that I can easily see finishing as a top 3 tight end coming into the 2023 season. And I did the same thing on our redraft channel where I said, I want you guys to pause the video. I want you guys to stop and comment down below. Not named Darren Waller or Saquon Barkley, who is the wide receiver 1 on this team. And I bet you, as you guys comment, there's going to be so many different comments in the chat. People thinking it's Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson, Paris Campbell, Isaiah Hodgins. The list can go on. Darius Slayton. The list can go on and on of who we all believe the wide receiver 1 can be. But we all know who the true wide receiver or target 1 is going to be, and that's going to be Darren Waller. He's going to come in and demand targets. We've seen the history with Darren Waller finish as a top 2, top 3 tight end, obviously in 2020, 2021 with Derek Carr, but now he comes in as a wide receiver or the tight end 1, the number 1 target. I mean, he is the number 1 target, the wide receiver 1, the tight end 1, everything 1 over there in New York. And Darren Waller is going to come in and take the next step. Obviously, as a Giants fan, this may come off a little bit biased, but I am a massive believer of Daniel Jones. We saw what he did this past year. We saw how he kind of made and brought consistency. It's going to be a little bit more difficult than when you have Darius Slay and Jalen Hyatt taking the top off of the defenses and Darren Waller sitting in the flat. I think that is something exciting that we can see coming in to this year. I mean, we heard reports of saying you have to take Darren Waller off the field just so Daniel Jones can target somebody else. The chemistry that they build in the offseason, the chemistry that they're building right now in camp, the communication, the comms, the composure, everything that they have been bringing and building so far has been phenomenal. Maybe this is the Travis Kelce to Daniel Jones, right? I mean, we can easily see that coming in, the Josh Allen's. Maybe this is the Stephon Diggs to Daniel Jones, is Darren Waller. Now, he is older. I completely agree. There is going to be a lot of question marks of, is he going to stay healthy? I completely agree. But if you need a tight end just to set you apart just a little bit to come into this season, tight end 10 at 30 years old, I think you can get him at a really decent price right now. Once again, you're going to have to really manipulate what you can get Darren Waller for, tight end 10 right now. But let me just read out the tight ends that are going right after and before him, because I think that's something interesting. Sam Laporta, wide receiver 9 right now, right? If you really think of these tight ends and the history, usually in their rookie year, maybe you have a Sam Laporta and that person that has Darren Waller is a win now perspective. Can you receive Darren Waller in a second, or whatever the case may be, and maybe draft another tight end next year? Obviously, this is a really good class, but that's the kind of opportunity, right? What about a Michael Mayer? The same situation. Do you send Michael Mayer, you send Michael Mayer and you receive Darren Waller in a second, or vice versa. You send Michael Mayer in a second to receive Darren Waller. I don't really know how that really works out. What about a Greg Dulcich? It's somebody that I do like this year, but I think to set yourself apart in the tight end position, once again, Darren Waller, you can go out and acquire him. So many different ways you can go about this. I'm trying to even see if there's anyone else that you can really go out and try to, once again, manipulate. You can do a Rashad Bateman. I don't think anyone wants to buy Rashad Bateman right now. An A.J. Dillon, you can go out for an Alvin Kamara if he comes back from suspension. Antonio Gibson. Once again, you're going to have to manipulate. You're really going to have to feel out what that looks like for you. But Darren Waller, once again, tight end 10 coming into in the community. He's also my tight end 10. Can easily finish as a top 10 tight end this year specifically. and I think it's a phenomenal win now trade. My next win now target at the running back position, and my last target for this video, that is Cam Akers. Yes, I know it's not sexy. Yes, I know he has a torn Achilles or tore his Achilles in the past, but let me tell you why. Currently in the community, RB26. He is my RB23 right now. And yes, the biggest caveat here is Cam Akers did tear his Achilles. And one of the biggest things that we all are scared of in the running back position, one of the worst injuries for a running back is an Achilles injury. But one of the things that we need to remember is that Cam Akers is now 2 years removed from this Achilles injury, and we've seen a good fantasy return from Cam Akers with that injury in 2 years past that injury. Okay, this past year, let me remind you what he did. Cam Akers finished as the RB33, didn't get the true workload till week 13. Obviously, the first game of the season, we all thought Cam Akers was going to come in, but it really was Darrell Henderson. He comes in, he shakes up the whole Cam Akers believers pot. And we heard that there was some drama with Cam Akers and Sean McVay, but now that's all cleared up, and he is the guy which we saw in the second half of the season where they dropped Henderson and Cam was the guy, right? From weeks 13 to 18, Cam Akers was the running back for 104 attempts, over 500 yards, 6 touchdowns, averaging 17.7 fantasy points per game. Cam Akers. Somebody that had a torn Achilles, one of the worst injuries for a running back, to come back and really reproduce fantasy relevancy in their career. Cam Akers. Okay, and one of the biggest things right now, once again, in a win now perspective, we're talking about what we're happening now as well, is that Cooper Kupp has an injury. And yes, I don't want to over panic, I don't want to over predict, but I think that's part of fantasy football. What happens if Cooper Kupp is not ready? What happens if Cooper Kupp misses the first half of the season, or the injury is worse than what we expected? Maybe they lean on Cam Akers a little bit more. Maybe he gets the true workload that we all hoped and expect from him coming into last year, and he gets that week 1. Let me remind you, in that span, Cam Akers, not in that span, but in Cam Akers' career, we really haven't seen him have the workload and usage that we've all saw. His rookie year in 2020, where we all got really excited for that year, he really didn't get a true workload until week 12, where we're saying, well, we saw that span in week 12 of Cam Akers come in. That's why we were going to draft him high in the second year. Coming into his second year in 2021, he tore his Achilles that year in the offseason. So now with the true workload coming into this year, with the true opportunity, him at least in that span, once again, from weeks 13 to 18, he was averaging 73% of the snaps. That's pretty big, averaging 17.3 attempts on the ground. That is the most Cam Akers has seen in his career in a consistent basis since 2020, the year his rookie season. So I think this is phenomenal value. Once again, RB23 in the community, right? Or RB26 in the community, my RB23. And here's some players I'm happy to trade away in a win now perspective. If you are maybe struggling, look, right now on Keep Trade Cut, they're saying you can get a late first. Maybe you didn't do your 2023 rookie draft yet, and you have the 112 and you want to send it for Cam Akers. I personally wouldn't do that. Maybe if I'm a win now perspective and I really believe Cam Akers can be this guy, but I think I'm not that big of a believer. I'm a believer, but not a first round pick believer. I'm especially at the 112, at the 111. I'm more of like a 203, 204, an early to mid second right now. If you have one, even in 2024, I'm willing to do that. But players that I'm willing to trade away to acquire Cam Akers, that I'm happy to take the risk on. Someone like a DeAndre Swift. I like Cam Akers in a win now perspective. Someone like a Devon A-Chain, that's very controversial. I'm not a huge Devon believer, but I mean, I still believe that maybe Dalvin Cook signs to this offense. What about an Isaiah Pacheco? I don't know if I want Isaiah Pacheco in a win now perspective, especially on the Kansas City Chiefs, where Patrick Mahomes is really not going to run the ball too often. Look, so many different ways. I mean, Aaron Rodgers maybe in a super flex league. It's a bit difficult because Cam Akers is in this area where, like, I don't know if I want to send a first for Cam Akers. Do I take the risk? Do I not? But look, so many different ways you can go. So once again, here are my win now trade targets: Deontay Johnson, Darren Waller, and Cam Akers. 3 players I truly believe can win you your 2023 season. So comment down below. Let me know who you think, who I missed out on this list, or if you agree or disagree. Let's have a conversation. And as always, it's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.